He rolled into the shelter expecting another quiet afternoon, but one familiar bark froze him in place. The officer's hands trembled on his wheelchair as he turned toward the sound. Behind a cold metal gate stood the K-9 he thought was gone forever. What happened next will make your heart ache. Officer Daniel Hayes had always believed that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about standing strong beside those you trust. For him, that trust lived in the steady eyes of his German Shepherd partner, Max. From the moment they were paired in the K-9 unit, something clicked between them. Max wasn't just another police dog. He was Daniel's shadow, his protector, and his best friend, every morning before sunrise. The two trained together in perfect sync, Daniel's commands sharp and precise, Max's responses faster than thought. Whether tracking suspects through dense woods or searching collapsed buildings for survivors, their bond grew unshakable. Fellow officers often said they moved like one being, man and dog bound by duty and something deeper. Something like love. Off duty, Max transformed from fearless working dog to gentle companion, resting his head on Daniel's lap after long shifts. Daniel used to joke that Max understood him better than most people did. He never imagined that someday that bond would be tested in a way that would change both their lives forever. It was supposed to be a routine call, a report of an armed suspect fleeing through the old industrial district. Officer Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel, Max alert beside him in the passenger seat, ears perked and eyes sharp. The radio crackled with updates as the chase intensified. Daniel could feel Max's anticipation. They had done this countless times before. Together, they were unstoppable. When they arrived at the scene, chaos unfolded. The suspect bolted between warehouses, firing wildly. Daniel shouted commands, and Max lunged forward, swift and fearless. The world became a blur of flashing lights and echoing gunfire. Daniel followed close behind, his heart pounding, his focus locked on Max's movement through the shadows. Then it happened. A deafening explosion tore through the night. The force threw Daniel backward, slamming him into the ground. Pain shot through his spine as darkness swallowed everything. When he opened his eyes again, sirens wailed in the distance, smoke filled the air, and Max was gone. Days later, Daniel awoke in a hospital bed, the sterile white room spinning around him. Doctors spoke softly about spinal injuries and recovery timelines, words that barely reached him. His body was broken, but all he could think about was his missing partner. "Where's Max?" he whispered. No one had an answer. The moment Daniel was strong enough to sit up in his wheelchair, his mission was clear. He had to find Max. Despite his pain, he spent every waking hour calling animal shelters, police stations, and rescue centers. He printed missing posters with Max's photo, his trembling hands pinning them to bulletin boards and street poles. The department launched searches in nearby woods, but weeks passed with no trace. Each day that ended without news felt heavier than the last. The world seemed quieter without the sound of Max's paws beside him. Even as friends encouraged him to focus on recovery, Daniel's thoughts never strayed from his partner. He replayed the explosion over and over, wondering if Max had been scared, hurt, or worse. Late at night, when the hospital lights dimmed, Daniel would whisper into the silence, "I'm not giving up on you, buddy." His voice cracked, but the determination in his eyes never faded. "I could live without walking," he told his nurse one evening, but not without knowing what happened to him. And deep down, he clung to one small, fragile hope that somehow Max was still out there, trying to find his way back home. Months slipped by, and the world outside Daniel's window seemed to move on without him. The posters had faded, the calls had stopped, and hope had thinned into something almost ghostly. Accepting life in a wheelchair was hard enough, but accepting a life without Max felt impossible. Yet somehow, he kept going. He began volunteering at a local veterans center, helping others who had lost more than he had. It gave him purpose, a reason to get out of bed each morning. Still, every night, before turning out the lights, he'd glance at the shelf above his desk, where Max's worn leather collar and service badge rested side by side. Sometimes, he'd catch himself listening for the familiar jingle of tags or the soft thump of paws against the floor. But the house stayed quiet. In that silence, Daniel learned to carry his grief quietly too, holding on to one truth that never faded. Max would always be with him, no matter where he was. It was a gray Rain-soaked afternoon when Daniel decided to visit the local animal shelter. The center director had invited him to speak to new volunteers about K9 training and rescue work. He hadn't planned to go, talking about dogs still reopened old wounds, but something in him said yes. Maybe sharing Max's story would help others. As Daniel rolled through the narrow corridors, the sounds of barking echoed off the concrete walls. Dozens of faces peered out from behind metal bars, some curious, some fearful, others quietly hopeful. He smiled gently at a trembling puppy, his heart aching with both love and loss. Then, as he turned the last corner, he froze. A low, trembling whine carried through the noise. It was soft, but unmistakable. His heart skipped. Slowly, he turned toward a cage at the end of the row. Inside sat a large German shepherd, his fur a little dull, his eyes weary, but those eyes. Daniel knew them anywhere. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The dog tilted his head, ears twitching, tail beginning to tremble with recognition. Daniel's throat tightened as his voice broke through the silence. "Max," he whispered. The shepherd let out a sharp, desperate bark that shattered the air, and in that instant, Daniel's world stopped spinning. For a heartbeat, no one in the shelter moved. Then the German shepherd began to cry, a raw, aching sound that made every volunteer turn. Max pressed his paws against the cage, his entire body trembling. Daniel's hands shook as he reached forward, tears already spilling down his face. "It's you," he whispered. "It's really you." The staff hurried to unlock the gate, unsure what was happening. The moment the latch clicked, Max bolted out, nearly knocking Daniel's wheelchair backward as he leapt into his lap. The dog buried his head against Daniel's chest, whining uncontrollably, tail wagging so hard it thudded against the floor. Daniel wrapped his arms around his old partner, sobbing openly. "I thought I lost you forever," he choked out. Pressing his forehead to Max's, the room went silent except for the sound of their reunion, soft cries, heavy breaths, and the faint hum of the rain outside. Even the staff stood frozen, some wiping their eyes. It wasn't just a dog finding his owner. It was two souls finding their way back after being broken apart. For Daniel, the months of pain and uncertainty melted away in that instant. Max was home. Against all odds, his partner had found him again, and for the first time in a long while. Daniel felt whole. When the emotions finally settled, one of the shelter workers stepped forward, still holding the open cage door. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. "Sir, we found him weeks ago," she said softly. "He was wandering along the outskirts of town, limping and exhausted. We tried scanning for a chip, but it wouldn't read. It must have been damaged." Daniel blinked, still stroking Max's fur, his mind racing to piece it together. "All this time," he murmured. The woman nodded, kneeling beside them. He wouldn't let anyone near him at first. He barely ate, barely moved. It's like he was waiting for someone. Her eyes softened as she watched Max lick Daniel's hands, tail thumping with joy. "And today, when you came in, he started whining before we even reached the corridor." Another worker added quietly, "It's like he knew you'd come." Daniel swallowed hard, his vision blurring again. He looked at Max, who was now sitting proudly beside his wheelchair, head resting against his leg. "You never gave up, did you, buddy?" he whispered. Max's tail wagged once more, a silent answer that said everything words never could. The next few days passed in a blur of joy and disbelief. Paperwork was signed, photos taken, and before long, Max was back where he belonged, curled up beside Daniel's bed, just like before. The police department organized a small ceremony to welcome the hero K9 home. Officers lined up to salute as Daniel rolled in, Max proudly at his side, his badge gleaming once again. For the first time since the accident, Daniel smiled without forcing it. Life hadn't returned to what it was, but something new had begun. No longer on patrol, he started working with injured officers and training therapy dogs to help veterans heal. With Max always beside him, offering comfort to anyone who needed it in quiet moments. Daniel often caught Max watching him, those same steady eyes filled with understanding. Their bond had been tested by fire and loss, but it had only grown stronger. Together, they had found something worth more than duty: hope, purpose, and a second chance at life. They say a dog never forgets his owner, and Daniel knew that was true. Max hadn't just remembered him. He had fought to survive for him. Every scar on the dog's body told a story of loyalty, courage, and love stronger than any distance or pain. Together again, they were living proof that some bonds can't be broken. Daniel often visited the shelter where they'd reunited, sharing their story with others who had lost hope. Sometimes, he would tell them, smiling down at Max, "The ones we love find their way back when we least expect it." His words inspired more adoptions, more reunions, and more faith in second chances as the camera fades on their peaceful home. Max rests his head on Daniel's knee, eyes closing contentedly. Daniel whispers, "You're my miracle, buddy." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of loyalty, love, and hope. Stay tuned. Our next story might just make you cry too. Weeks after the reunion, Daniel found himself waking each morning with a renewed sense of peace. The nightmares had quieted, replaced by the steady rhythm of Max's breathing at his bedside. He often wheeled out onto the porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching Max chase the light across the yard. Life was slower now, but it was filled with meaning again. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a young officer in training. She had read about Daniel and Max's story and wrote, "You reminded me why I joined the force, to protect, to love, to never give up." Daniel smiled through tears, realizing that their bond had touched hearts far beyond what he could have imagined. As the camera pans out one last time, the pair sit side by side beneath a golden sky. Daniel places a hand on Max's head and whispers, "We made it, partner." If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us of the power of love, loyalty, and second chances.